policy. C, China is a growing and existential threat to human rights and freedoms across the world. D, ensuring China's commitment to international human rights standards. Fallacies and misconceptions about China. In the West, there has always been a dominant school of thought that contends that quiet diplomacy is the more effective way in dealing with China. The logical consequence of it has been for the Western governments to exercise restraint to avoid the loss of face of Chinese leaders. And it is obvious that this restraint to avoid the loss of face of Chinese leader has a great part in the loss of lives and freedoms of Tibetans, Uyghurs, and other people in an overall deteriorating human rights situation in China. China has also been skillful in cornering the Western government in a defensive position by constantly reminding the Western government of its colonial past and the humiliation inflicted on China. By exploiting the bad conscience of Western powers, China has been able to reject any criticism of her human rights record with impunity as unacceptable interference in China's internal affairs. However, if such arguments are tolerated, then the question arises why this should not be applicable to other countries in Asia and Africa with similar history. Moreover, as a legacy of the Cold War, China has been regarded for a long time as benign and as an ally. During the Cold War, the Soviet Union was the principal enemy of the Western Bloc. Although communism and one-party rule in China has been no less brutal and oppressive than in the Soviet Union. However, Western attitude towards Communist China has been more tolerant and accommodating. In fact, Mao was an icon of the Western youth and the left in late 1960s and 70s. A fundamental fallacy of the Western government approach in promoting human rights in China has been the exclusive focus on engagement with the government. However, ultimately, it is the defenders and activists of human rights and advocates of democracy and rule of law in those countries who will shape the future course of their country. Consequently, a principled, strategic, and effective human rights policy must aim at encouraging, strengthening, and empowering those forces. However, instead of considering every initiative and statement in the light of how they might affect the spirit and the actual situation of those activists and advocates, unfortunately, Western governments often take the degree of sensitivity of the Chinese leader on such issues as a measure. As a result, today's China is more authoritarian and totalitarian than she has ever been since the days of the Cultural Revolution. The loss of credibility of Western human rights policy. Many Western governments are engaged in a bilateral human rights dialogue with China. This dialogue is adopted as the principal instrument to promote human rights in China. After more than 2 decades of dialogue, it is an open secret that this approach has failed to produce any tangible progress. It is clear that the Chinese willingness to engage in bilateral human rights dialogue only aims to prevent public discussions of her human rights record. The Western government's engagement in this dialogue, without any conditions and benchmarks, is seen by the Chinese government as a clear sign that Western government's topmost priority is to maintain smooth relations on a wide range of issues of mutual interest, rather than public disagreements and confrontations over human rights. The Chinese government accepts that Western governments need to raise human rights with them from time to time in order to mollify the public at home. But the Chinese government seems never to have felt any real pressure to introduce any meaningful initiative on human rights. The bilateral human rights dialogue has thus become an empty ritual exercise that helped to avoid the loss of faith of not only Chinese leaders, but that of the Western governments too. As a result, the credibility of Western human rights policy has been lost. China is a growing and existential threat to human rights and freedoms across the world. The PRC is the largest, most powerful, and for minorities in China, such as Tibetans and Uyghur brothers and sisters, most brutal and totalitarian state in the world. It denies basic human rights to all of its nearly 1.4 billion citizens. There is no freedom of speech, thought, assembly, religion, movement, or any semblance of political liberty in China. The technological advancement in the field of information and communication has given to the regime in China new tools of control and oppression of its citizens. With sophisticated online surveillance, facial recognition, artificial intelligence, data mining, etc., the Chinese regime has mobilized a set of tools that allows it to extensively control and routinely repress its citizens and shape political opinions by manipulating their feelings and grievances on just about any issue. Against this background, there are growing concerns about export of key individual surveillance technologies to other countries. A study published by Open Technology Fund in September this year documents sales of various types of surveillance and internet censorship equipment to at least 73 countries across 5 continents. The state-backed Hikvision digital company, for example, is now the largest surveillance company in the world and is already operating in more than 100 countries through its local partners. This clearly shows that China is exporting its digital tools of control and operation to the authoritarians the world over. It is also clear that greater economic and technological integration with China poses a serious threat to everyone outside of China as well. We can no longer ignore the fact that China is demanding ever more humiliating acts of submission and capitulation of its trading and economic partners. Today, governments and multinational companies are struggling with the pressing question how to avoid drawing the anger and outrage of an increasingly politicized, vengeful, and punitive China at oneself. The harsh reality is that economic growth and technological advancement, instead of liberating the Chinese people, is enabling now the regime in China to corrupt, intimidate, and coerce the rest of the world. This represents a growing and existential threat to human rights and freedoms across the world. Ensuring China's commitment to international human rights standards. China's total disregard of international human rights standards and its corrupting influence the world over must be countered and resisted. The community of democracies must stand up against a totalitarian China. We need to realize that our own basic rights and freedoms are not secure and safe as long as there are dictatorships in other parts of the world. The communities of democracies must join forces and pursue a more effective, robust, and strategic human rights policy and hold China accountable for its systematic and gross violations of human rights. There is already a range of instruments and mechanisms available for doing so on national as well as international level. What is lacking is the political will and a sense of unity, common purpose, and common mission of the democracies around the world. Therefore, we need a rededication to our fundamental belief in the inherent equality and dignity of human beings, of all human beings, and in the universal values of human rights, democracy, and the rule of law. This rededication to our fundamental values will strengthen the political will and self-confidence of our democracies, which we need to promote and champion the principle of the universality and indivisibility of the Declaration of Human Rights all over the world. Thank you.
Thank you, Kyalsung Kenzela. Now I would like to request Edward Chin, who is the governor of 2047 Hong Kong Monitor. He's an activist and advocate of democracy in Hong Kong. He has many writings and radio shows advocating the democracy and the rule of law in Hong Kong. I would like to invite Edward Chin to make his presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Fraser. Well, it has been a very tough time going on in Hong Kong because Hong Kongers are at war, fighting for their own freedoms. In the last 5 or 6 months or so, my background has been actually more in finance, hedge funds, and I took a brief stint back in the early 90s running a radio program turned into a full-time Cantonese and Mandarin radio program in Toronto, and then switched back to finance. But for some reason, journalism is always in my heart. So I'm going to talk more about what's going on in the last 6 months or so and see how this so-called water revolution would come into. I think if the Hong Kong/Beijing government doesn't really listen to Hong Kong people, this fight could last on for another 10 years. So a lot of people are thinking about leaving Hong Kong, moving their assets overseas. So the beneficiary of this thus far is Singapore, Jersey, Channel Island, and so many other offshore places. But more so, it is not just a fight for young people anymore. I have seen a lot of people who are in finance and all walks of life come in and join this fight for Hong Kong's freedom. We had over 1 million people that show up in a peaceful march on June 9th, and then the government served the Hong Kong people with tear gas, rubber bullets, and beanbag bullets. And a few days later, more people came out. 2 million people came out a few days later, which is unprecedented. It's like 1/4 the size of Hong Kong's population. Now, most of you probably would be able to catch what's going on through Facebook, the internet. And I just take the opportunity to extract some of the pictorial stuff of what's going on in the last 72 hours or so. This is Central. This is the financial district. We have riot police coming to Hong Kong, and we have a 30,000 strong police force. But very strangely, the demeanor of these police law officers, they are quite different from what I saw from 5 years ago during the umbrella movement. Their accent is different, and the build is different, larger in size, and the way they beat up the demonstrators is quite different. Now, there has been a lot of reports saying there are mysterious deaths, and that is found in the sea, and also found naked near the bushes. So you don't know, like, if it is like 5 years ago, we talk about the Occupy Central, which I'm actively involved in with a lot of finance people. It's non-violent, peaceful demonstration, and then the worst case scenario, it's they will take us, for a trial. But this time, I think technology has changed. We are talking about a younger generation of demonstrators who use the blockchain technology to communicate with one another. They use Telegram and also a social media platform called Lin Dang in Cantonese, which I'm going to talk more about later. So just show you a few more slides. On your left-hand side, that's traffic police firing real rounds of bullets to a demonstrator that is not carrying anything lethal, and that he is still under critical condition in a hospital. Now on your right-hand side, you could see the university students. They kind of progress to the next level. They use a petrol bomb, which is what I call a poor man's bomb, to fight back. Because the Hong Kong government / the Hong Kong police, they try to raid the internet site of a university that controls 80% of the internet flow, which is called the Chinese University. On your upper left-hand side, 5 years ago, I don't see a lot of helicopters hovering around Hong Kong Island. Now they want to know the strategy of Hong Kong demonstrators. And then we were sprayed with something that makes you look a little bit bright at night. So we don't know what those are. And then in Chinese University, more than 1,000 tear gas canisters were launched, and we don't know the effect of these ingredients. What is the long-term damage? Also, the Hong Kong police force has actually bought a few water cannons. These are like blue water cannon with a pepper spray, and something that's toxic. Hong Kong people asked the Hong Kong government and also the Hong Kong police force, what's the ingredient behind this? I mean, what's the long-term effect? I have Hong Kong financiers working on Hong Kong Island side. People who are pregnant, they are so afraid that, when they launch all these tear gas, even in Central, what would be the long-term effect? I took this just before I hop on the plane 24 hours ago. And then the one on the left, it's taken right before I go to the Airport Express. The one on the right is this past Monday, when they had like 3 days of tear gas in Central. Think about it. You launch all these tear gas and rubber bullets on Wall Street or downtown London. Suddenly you think, are the policemen, are they on drugs or what? Or something I don't understand. I still don't understand. Now, the one country, two systems is supposed to last until 2047. That's the name of our group. It's called 2047 Hong Kong Monitor. But as someone who has been in finance and also financial journalism for a long time, more so in hedge funds, I think we have come pretty much to an end of the so-called one country, two systems. We are living in a one country, at most 1.1 systems. The last 3 years, my group, some people from Taiwan as well, had the opportunity to meet up with His Holiness, the Dalai Lama, in Blue Mountain, Sydney, and also in Brussels. And then we learned more about the 17-point treaty that the Tibetan people signed in 1951 compared to the joint declaration that Hong Kong people is not involved in, but the UK and also China government signed in 1984. Basically, other than diplomacy and military, we believe that the Chinese Communist Party would not interfere with Hong Kong people's way of life. Now, let me get this straight. Hong Kong, to us, is part of China. But to our group's understanding, Tibet is not part of China. We make it very clear, and we say it wherever we go. That's our group stance. So when people accuse us that the Hong Kong they all want to be independent, it's not true. We want the one country, two system to be intact for 50 years. And if it works, it's go on for another 50 years and another 50. It might be different from what President Tsai Ing-wen talks about, the system doesn't work. But a lot of us have our doubts now because of the excessive use of force that is witnessed. I'm also Canadian. I had my education in the US and in Canada, and I think I learned more about democracy during my 16 years of stay in North America. So on January 1st, when we realized that the CFO of Huawei was detained, but at the same time, 2 Canadians were also detained in China. On January 1st, we go on a march with some Chinese Canadians in Hong Kong, asking President Xi Jinping to release the 2 Canadians. And also, you can see the sign, we say end repression in Tibet, Hong Kong, and Taiwan. I personally, my office was raided in central Hong Kong. Police came to me and say, hey, there are interviewees coming on January 1st, and after 2 hours of interview, they disappear. So they make excuses to just to intimidate you. And then they visit my home 7 times in less than 48 hours, making up different excuses. And I have fire trucks, ambulances, policemen came, and then they say, is there a 7-year-old boy that is forced naked and the head is stick outside of the window? So they make up all these excuses, and this is before the so-called extradition bill that the Hong Kong government proposed. But anyways, what happened to me was peanuts. And I did report it to the Canadian consulate in Hong Kong, and I also consult with the US consulate because it involves the Huawei case. And I think it was quite serious at that time. But then it is no comparison compared to what is going on now, because everyone is in duress, so to speak. Now, I just want to go through this part quickly. This is from one of the studies from the World Health Organization. They talk about Hong Kong as a place where people have one of the longest life expectancy. It's ranked at number 8. A little bit lower than Macau, which is number 4. I still don't understand why, because they have casino going on to keep up the adrenaline rush. I don't know. But then Macau has Article 23. And to put on a more serious note, I think they will successfully and officially install all the AI lampposts by the end of this year, more than 1,000. And Hong Kong is kind of following suit. It is like George Orwell's 1984 in Hong Kong, with a lot of beating and the Tiananmen 2.0 style. So not going through all these, as I say earlier, I still write a lot. I just finished a finance book a few months ago, but I changed the topic to Free Hong Kong. I think it's more relevant, telling Hong Kong people, besides trying to use either Soros or Warren Buffett way of making money, they should think about what they are really fighting for as well, because time is kind of running out. So I'm not going to talk too much about your trading days in life. We could have a side talk later on if you want to know about what is equity long short and convertible bond arbitrage. I'm not going to talk about that. But putting up more on the religious head, I got baptized in the U.S. in Minneapolis during my first year of college. And I get to know more about Christianity. And then definitely the umbrella movement from 5 years ago, pretty much a lot of them are Christians. So we think that this is a fight for the betterment of mankind as well. So this is from 5-6 years ago. We had the Occupy Central, which turned into umbrella movement. And then media Mongols supported the movement. We have Jimmy Lai, who owns Apple Daily. Now, I mentioned way back in the early 90s, I did take a stint full-time running a radio broadcast multicultural radio station in Toronto called CHIN Radio. So I had the opportunity at that time to talk to the former CE, C.Y. Leung, asking him, what do you think about the Tiananmen crackdown? Of course, that was almost 30 years ago. Now, when the extradition bill was proposed by Carrie Lam, the current chief executive, I made a comment on the Canadian Globe and Mail saying that if the extradition bill is passed, a lot of people would consider fleeing Hong Kong, and there are more than 300,000 Canadians living in Hong Kong. Actually, an official count, I think, is more than 450,000. And then he wrote back on his Facebook saying that if you decide to leave, please hand in your Hong Kong ID card. We will be very happy to see you leave. So it's like threats like these, it's not just me who is receiving it. C.Y. Leung, the former chief executive, liked to write on Facebook, not using Twitter, but writing things that try to intimidate Hong Kong people not to fight anymore. But like I say, everything looks Mickey Mouse when you look at what happened in Tiananmen, when they use real rounds of bullets, when they use real PLA army. So the nonviolent way model, is it going to work? I'm still kind of thinking this is better for people like us who are in our early 50s. We are not in our late teens or early 20s anymore. We cannot hold up like a petrol bomb and fight, right? And we see a younger version of Joshua Wong and Professor Benny Tai. That's in 2014, and then let's do a high-frequency trading and keep rolling. Now, my circle of friends are mostly in finance. That's another person who is an activist, more like a shareholder activist. In 2014, we talk about, like we should continue with the fight, but also come back to Admiralty and then protest. So that was Occupy Central / Umbrella Movement. And then we did write to President Xi Jinping a few times. Of course, he would not receive it, asking President Xi to honor the one country, two systems. And we came up with the 10 requests to the Communist Party. CC, the former chief executive, Carrie Lam, who is now the CE. Of course, we didn't expect more severe things to happen. So if you are interested in the 10 requests to the Chinese Communist Party, basically we just want them to abide by what is prescribed in basic law. We put it in summarized version. Of course, this is banned, Winnie the Pooh, and then the tiger. Now, And then our group, really, we studied this, and then we kind of asked Hong Kong people to understand more about what's going on in 84 and what's going on in 51 in the 17-point treaty. Some people get it right now because they see the similarity. And of course, the Chinese Foreign Ministry, and I don't know whether there are any journalists from mainland China, but don't get me wrong, they keep on continuously saying that the Sino-British Joint Declaration is already no longer has any realistic meaning. So what does that take us Hong Kongers to fight for? We did ride our Harley-Davidson motorcycle with the Tibetan flag in Hong Kong, and some of us got stopped because of the Tibetan flag. We sing for democracy, we got stopped. We talk about the 17-point treaty. It's a little bit complicated for Hong Kong people, but still, as I alluded to earlier, they see the similarity, and then has been, an eye-opening event for some of us from Hong Kong to understand more about what's going on in Tibet and the situation we are facing in Hong Kong. And then more persecution of the underground church, and then the Hong Kong's Cardinal Zhang talked a lot about it. So some of the Hong Kong tycoons, they were saying that if the extradition bill is passed, people will be in exile, including him. So let me just go to the last part because my presentation got very long, and then I will, let's go to the last few slides, talk about the worst case scenario. Now, before July 1st, one person jumped from a shopping mall, and then you see the yellow raincoat. That is kind of dramatic and symbolic. And then more people died now, and then policemen dressed as demonstrators. And then they are using real round of bullets. And then Hong Kong demonstrators, they look for actually bulletproof vests. And then we got some shipment, and I don't want to tell you where, because wearing it is legal. Shipping it over is gray area. So we have to be careful about what's going on. And then last three slides I want to talk about is, I have someone from my alma mater, from my same high school. He is a fifth-year medical school student from Chinese University. All I'm going to say is, at first they were paramedics, but when you see like policemen bashing demonstrators like crazy, some of them, they become more front line. And then some people do speak out. And then they will write a will inside their backpack saying, if I die, I fight for a good cause. So that makes us very sad, indeed. You have a US Senator wearing a shirt called Free Hong Kong. And then also demonstrators from Hong Kong use that technology to fight. I mentioned already. But where is it going to end? We don't know, but all I want to say is we as Hong Kongers and also people who are under duress by China, let's all keep hope alive. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Edward. We admire greatly your personal as well as Hong Kong citizens' courage and determination, and I hope there will be end to this Hong Kong situation sooner rather than later. Thank you very much for the presentation, for bringing all us up to date with the Hong Kong situation. Thank you. Now, my next guest is Hilary Miller. She is actually seconding for Helen Noor. Very short notice, I would like to thank Hillary Miller personally for standing in for her. Thank you so much. And Hillary Miller actually works in the United Nations Watch. She is a historian and political science graduate. She works in the United Nations work and works mainly with overseeing of works of UN bodies worldwide, drafting articles, press releases, and speeches. So without me going too far and trying to save the time, I would like to ask Hillary Miller to make her presentation. Thank you.
There we go. Thank you so much for those remarks and for inviting me to speak today on behalf of Hillel. And it's an honor to be in company with others who have made the promotion and protection of human rights their life's work. As you had mentioned, my name is Hillary Miller, and I work for United Nations Watch, a human rights NGO based here in Geneva. We monitor the performance of the United Nations by the yardstick of its own charter and call out member states that failed to carry out the just application of UN Charter principles. For this reason, UN Watch is particularly concerned with the UN Human Rights Council, which is corrupted by brutal dictators and violators of human rights. Voting members of the Council, which include states such as Venezuela, Russia, Cuba, and China, abuse their power on the world's top human rights body to mask their transgressions and evade criticism for their egregious records on human rights, while also working in concert to pass resolutions of self-praise. China is a member of the 47-nation UN Human Rights Council and plays a negative role for myriad reasons. China has been a member for essentially every year since the Council was established in 2006, having only come off due to term limits. Their prolonged membership is absurd, given that China is one of the world's worst violators of human rights. A 2019 report from Freedom House rates China as not free and underscores how the government has consolidated power by cracking down on journalists, implementing robust internet censorship and surveillance, and repressing religious groups as evidenced by the mass detention of Uyghur Muslims in so-called political re-education centers in Xinjiang province. With all of this in mind, it is important to ask, why does it matter that China is a member of the world's top human rights body? Today I will discuss the different ways that China negatively influences the UN Human Rights Council. First, China systematically votes the wrong way when it comes to resolutions on human rights. Second, China interrupts guest speakers as well as intimidates and harasses defenders of human rights during council sessions. Furthermore, China has a history of pressuring UN officials to do things in contravention of UN ethics procedure. China is also known to contrive fake NGOs that vouch for its human rights record despite the facts on the ground. And finally, China spouts hypocrisy and lies in coordination with other bad actors in an effort to create a false narrative of the reality of its human rights situation. For over a decade, UN Watch has seen up close how China's conduct at the United Nations is antithetical to Resolution 6251, which reaffirms that all states, regardless of their political, economic, and cultural systems, have the duty to promote and protect human rights and fundamental freedoms. As mentioned before, one way that China negatively affects the UN Human Rights Council is how it systematically votes the wrong way when it comes to resolutions on human rights. When it comes to positive resolutions that speak out for victims facing some of the most dire human rights abuses and that call out governments that abuse their human rights, China systematically votes against those resolutions. For example, in 2018, in a resolution condemning Syria for human rights violations in eastern Ghouta and denying humanitarian access to the area, China voted no. In a resolution on Iran that extended the mandate of the Special Rapporteur to investigate human rights abuses in the country, China voted no. In a resolution on Burundi, which condemns government forces for human rights violations, China voted no. And in a resolution on Myanmar that strongly condemned gross human rights violations against Rohingya Muslims in Rakhine State and extended the mandate of the Special Rapporteur to investigate the government's admission to extrajudicial killings, China was one of the only 7 countries in the world, together with Venezuela, Iraq, Pakistan, Kyrgyzstan, Burundi, and Cuba, to vote no. Furthermore, and sadly, the Council also often adopts counterproductive resolutions that undermine human rights. China always votes to support those negative resolutions. For example, in 2018, the Council adopted its annual resolution on human rights and unilateral coercive measures. This is a Cuban-initiated UNHRC mandate that defines all US and European sanctions against rogue regimes as violations of human rights. The Special Rapporteur who implements this mandate, Idris Jazari, routinely defends the world's worst regimes by portraying them as victims of evil Western sanctions. For example, in 2016, he issued a report blaming US sanctions on Sudan for damaging the right to life, the right to health, the right to development, the right to drinkable water, the right to work, the right to education, the right of the elderly, the rights of people with disability, women's rights, the rights of the child, and the right to food. However, he said nothing on the fact that the country was ruled by an oppressive and genocidal dictator, Omar al-Bashir, who is wanted by the International Criminal Court for crimes against humanity. Likewise, in 2017, Jaziri issued a report that made the astounding claim that the Russian government of Vladimir Putin is a victim of human rights violations. He has issued similar reports defending other vicious regimes. And unsurprisingly, China routinely votes for such politicized mandates, typically created by Cuba, whose only purpose is to undermine universal human rights and strengthen the regimes who are the perpetrators. So, the way China votes and the resolutions that it supports are important and clear indicators of how China plays a negative role on the UN Human Rights Council. Another way that China negatively affects the Council is in its conduct during sessions. The Chinese delegation, without any legitimate basis or cause for obstruction, regularly interrupts speakers who seek to expose China's human rights abuses. UN Watch has seen this deliberate effort to curb free speech multiple times over the last decade. In March 2011, UN Watch brought Dr. Yang Jianli, a rights activist, survivor of the Tiananmen Square massacre, president of Initiatives for China, Harvard Fellow, and UN Watch board member, to speak on China's failure to uphold basic human rights. Moments after he began, the Chinese delegation interrupted Mr. Yang in a point of order to claim that the speaker was not addressing the issue under debate, which was an agenda item specifically designated to discuss human rights situations that require the Council's attention. In another incident in March 2014, UN Watch brought Tiana Wang to testify before the Council on China's detention of her father, Wang Bingzhang, a rights activist and democracy leader who has been serving a life sentence since 2002. Just 1 minute after Ms. Wang began her speech, China's delegation objected that she was only permitted to address, quote, abstract situations of human rights and not specific cases, such as her father's imprisonment. And in March 2018, when UN Watch again brought Dr. Yang Jianli to address the 47-nation Human Rights Council on China's crackdown on the right to freedoms of expression and speech, the Chinese delegation interrupted Yang moments after he began. In a point of order, they falsely claimed that Dr. Yang was not addressing the correct topic, which was universal human rights as enshrined in the 1993 Vienna Declaration, and went further at the end of the speech in a right of reply to say that, quote, NGOs and individuals with ulterior motives use this forum to fulfill their evil purposes. In July 2019, UN Watch saw another case of China's regular pattern of obstructing speakers when they twice interrupted celebrity musician and Hong Kong pro-democracy activist Denise Ho. In both attempts to disrupt her remarks, China's delegation argued that she was defaming China for speaking against its interference in Hong Kong. These blatant and repeated efforts to interrupt rights activists, whose only motive is to expose the truth, reveals how China abuses its position on the Council to silence critical voices and more generally undermines human rights. China not only seeks to stifle dissent by interrupting speakers, but also by harassing and intimidating human rights defenders. A 2015 Reuters report put a spotlight on China's effort to blunt scrutiny of its human rights record with its escalating use of intimidation and spying to silence critics at the UN. Such was the case when Tiana Wang spoke on behalf of UN Watch in March 2014. A report in the New York Times thoroughly details China's active espionage targeting Ms. Wang, which was carried out by a representative of an NGO with close ties to the government. Ms. Wang recalled the incident in the following narrative. I was sitting at a desk using my computer when, unbeknownst to me, one of the Chinese men used a computer tablet to take unauthorized photographs of me. After a UN Secretariat staff member told him to stop, I turned around a few minutes later to see that he continued to photograph me. He was hiding his tablet inside his suit, but the camera was directly pointing at me. Security eventually escorted the man out of the room, inspected the photographs, and confirmed that there were several photographs of me, my computer screen, and my personal belongings. I obviously felt violated and repulsed. In response to this flagrant effort to intimidate and harass Ms. Wang, UN Watch issued a letter to then-President Baudelaire Ella of the Human Rights Council, urging the HRC Bureau to condemn this act of deliberate intimidation and reprisal against our delegate in her cooperation with the United Nations human rights mechanisms. And in another incident last year when Dr. Yang spoke before the Council, a member of China's delegation was caught taking pictures of him outside the plenary room for more than 10 minutes. While China has a clear record of using NGOs and delegates as proxies to intimidate and harass activists, they have also pressured UN officials to violate UN ethics procedure. Such was the case in May 2017, when the UN Human Rights Office, at China's request, dangerously handed over the names of 4 activists slated to attend a Human Rights Council session. UN Watch responded immediately by penning a letter to then High Commissioner Zeid Ra'ad al-Hussein on how the practice of advanced disclosure of names only serves to embolden state parties, in particular China, in the effort to harass human rights defenders. Our letter stated the following: China is particularly known for harassing those who speak out against it at the HRC. Thus, any policy which enables China or any other state party to find out which dissidents will be attending an HRC session in advance of the session enables China's heavy-handed intimidation tactics. This is contrary to the very purpose of the UN and the HRC, and institutions meant to guard human rights and expose, not facilitate, abuses. No political dissidents should be subjected to harassment or intimidation for traveling to Geneva to campaign for human rights at the UN. In addition to its poor voting record, interrupting speakers, harassing human rights defenders, and pressuring UN officials, China undermines the mission and purpose of the UN Human Rights Council by contriving fake NGOs to vouch for its human rights record. In the case of Tiana Wang, the man accused of spying on her was a member of the China Association for Preservation and Development of Tibetan Culture, or the CAPDTC, a Beijing-based group set up in 2004 with close links to the Chinese Communist Party's United Front Work Department. Furthermore, China manufactured a list of fake NGOs to commend its human rights record in wake of the adoption of China's Universal Periodic Review outcome at the March 2019 Council session. For example, delegates from a group aptly named the Chinese Association for International Understanding stated that all people in Xinjiang province had equal access to the same rights and full development, and lauded the government's positive impact on intercultural centers in the region. And also during the MARC session, the CAPDTC, the same group that spied on Ms. Wang, falsely claimed that all Tibetans had freedom and that the central government and the autonomous government of Tibet had worked together to preserve Tibetan culture. China not only contrives fake groups to manufacture lies and conjure false praise, but also purveys lies itself. A final way that China negatively influences the Council is in how it deliberately lies in order to manipulate the facts on the ground, especially with regard to the situation of Uyghur Muslims. UN Watch saw this in July 2019, just a few months ago, when China penned a letter with 50 co-signatories, including the brutal regimes of Russia, Venezuela, Iran, and Syria, among others, to High Commissioner for Human Rights Michelle Bachelet, that fabricates its treatment of Uyghurs in Xinjiang province. Rather than condemning China for forcibly detaining over 1 million Uyghurs in so-called vocational education and training centers, the letter praises China for undertaking a series of counterterrorism measures in the region and for its, quote, remarkable achievement in the field of human rights and many contributions to the international human rights cause. And these lies exist beyond formal correspondences between diplomats and delegates. Just a few weeks ago, during the September session of the Human Rights Council, Chinese propaganda littered the halls of the United Nations here in Geneva. Thousands passed through a display that touted China's fair treatment of Tibetans, Uyghurs, and 1.3 billion others said to experience the full enjoyment of human rights in China. To conclude, China's voting record and malign conduct at the UN shows the degree to which it negatively impacts the Human Rights Council. The fact of its prolonged membership on the 47-nation Human Rights Council, the world's top human rights body, is absurd, alarming, and needs to be called out. That is the very mission and purpose of UN Watch, to ensure that bad actors like China do not get a pass when it comes to upholding human rights. In this effort, we speak out against China for all of the many reasons I discussed today when it contravenes Resolution 6251 and neglects its responsibility to promote and protect human rights and fundamental freedoms. Thank you so much for having me speak today on such a critical matter, and I truly appreciate the opportunity to represent United Nations Watch and also the many takeaways and insights that will come from this panel today. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ms. Miller, for updating us and really, truly giving us an insight into what China is doing and using its power to derail the United Nations work on the human rights. And I wish all the success for UN Watch for this, for your mission, that such activities China should be really bring to justice. And we wish you great energy and luck in order to have success in your work for the Chinese to be hopefully taken out of the UN Human Rights Council. Thank you so much. Now, my last guest is again, is not according to the printed material. We have a last minute secondment again from Martin Halla. He has taken ill. We are sorry to say that, and we wish him very quick recovery. But now we have, instead of Martin Halla, Philippe Giroche. Mr. Philippe Giroche is a sinologist at Charles University in Prague. He works at synopsis.cz, a China-focused project based in Czech Republic. Philip specializes on China's United Front's work activities abroad, digital Leninism inside China, and China technology in general, and covers surveillance states in the East Turkestan. The title of his talk will be China's Digital Leninism, Xinjiangization of the whole country. Mr. Philip, floor is for you.
Thank you very much for the introduction. Thank you very much for inviting me, for having the honor to be here. First of all, I would like to deliver apologies of my aforementioned boss, Martin Hala, who has taken ill and can't really speak at this moment. So this presentation is very last minute, so I want to firstly apologize if I don't really fit necessarily the topic of the panel. I will present here basically a couple of concepts and research we have done for the last 2 or 3 years when looking at what's going on in Xinjiang or in East Turkestan, and basically especially what we have seen in recent years, despite many Western scholars and think tankers denying basically what we have seen spreading to the rest of the country, hence the Xinjiangization of the whole country, and to many a degree even to the rest of the world. So just to explain why I'm actually here, I'm here because we have this project called synopsis.cz that's semi-based at Charles University in Prague. We are a group of sinologists who have since 2016 been covering special developments in Central and Eastern Europe where we're based, but at the same time, at this moment, we can basically say that we have a group of 20 to 30 scholars who cooperate with us, people based in countries from Canada to New Zealand, and basically trying to make sense of what's actually going on in the rest of the world when it comes to engagement with China, mainly using Chinese sources, that is to bring the real thinking and the real motives behind CCP's actions. That's basically if you just look at their English publications and English propaganda, simply that's a whole different world. So that's what we are doing. And obviously human rights, especially when it comes to Xinjiang, Tibet, now Hong Kong, is something that's becoming a large part of it as well. So when it comes to digital authoritarianism, when it comes to surveillance states in China, mostly people will imagine pictures like this. Cameras, facial recognition, AI that's able to basically describe all kinds of various information, what it is able to, in the end, when matched with a proper cloud database, actually identify specific people and give information to whoever is watching about who these people are, where they're coming, and in what China's ambition actually is to even predict what they're gonna do. But there's a concept, there is a thinking that's behind this, and basically I think this is important to understand that this is not necessarily an anomaly. This is not just this is not the end. This is the means to basically do what Lenin and what Mao and all these people wanted to do back in last century, and that is to take full control of the state, to take full control of the economy, of the people, and of their thinking. And it seems, and this is becoming clearer every day, that CCP believes that it's AI, it's big data analysis, it's collection of huge amounts of data that will allow it to do what they basically call 初心 of basically the first communist movements. So they're their original ideas, the original idea how a system should work. And especially after 2017, when China started basically discarding everything that Deng Xiaoping and his reforms brought, that is separation of state and the party, that is even the mechanism of leadership change, it's becoming clear that this is a path that China has now chosen, and it's basically betting all of its money on this working out. Economy is not important anymore, GDP growth is not important anymore, it's basically the control and the ability to technically, if necessary, suppress any dissent. And as we have seen in the last couple of years, any dissent, even within the party, has been quenched, has been basically destroyed, and at this point there's barely anybody still left in China that is actually able to do organized protests or systematically criticize CCP's policies. And so AI is very important to this, and this is why China is the largest investor in AI, and it should be at this point also mentioned that to a very high extent it's the West's fault, in the both in the fact that of the naivety of, for example, letting China enter WTO in 2001, and also at the same time the greed and the lust for money and technically knowledge and data that is still today leading to, for example, the I would say horrendous statement by MIT that was criticizing U.S. administration's new policies on restricting cooperation with Chinese digital companies that are involved in what's going on in Xinjiang, such as Hikvision and technically Dahua and all of these. So still there are people in the West who still don't understand that there's more at stake than just research, than just money, but we're actually talking about basically discarding all of our values, and also at the same time there's millions of people who are going to suffer because of just us wanting to do more research, get more money from China. This is just very briefly the model of internet control in China. I just want to show it to you here that it's not just the Great Firewall. It's many aspects, and as with almost anything in China, there's always high tech and at the same time high human factor at everything that's going on. So you have the algorithms, you have the AI that is censoring, that is screening, that is going through people's phones, but at the same time you have huge amounts of actual people, of police officers, of paramilitary groups that are actually enforcing this on the ground, that in some cases can within 10 or 20 minutes actually knock on your door when you send a wrong message on WeChat, or even these days, actually this year, we've seen increase in arrests based on Twitter messaging, which is something that is not usual for China, because Twitter has always been, because it's in English, because it's not in English, but it's banned in China, that you can write on Twitter to some degree whatever you want, but don't do it in China, don't do it on Weibo, don't do it on WeChat. But this year we've seen tens of thousands of profiles going down, thousands of people being arrested, or at least being invited for tea, as they say. That is to go to either police stations or local party members to explain what were your motives, why did you write this, and then they were often forced to shut down their accounts. Which of course also means that we're getting less and less information out of China, and everything is becoming more and more problematic, even for us doing research on this. The key concept behind this at the same time, which is China trying to export, especially through its Wuzhen conference that holds place every year in Wuzhen in China, where not so long ago you would also have people from Facebook and Apple going there Obviously now with the trade war and the whole shift in policy towards China, those people don't go there anymore, but they would, some of them still obviously try to get into Chinese market, and many of these companies often censor themselves, and especially as we have seen in Hong Kong with basically taking down some of the apps that the protesters were using. So again, this is being exported. This is being exported on the companies that are based in the West that technically should not feel the need to really bend to CCP's rule, but they're willingly doing it, again, because of money, because of research, because of access. And this is a concept that every state should have a complete and absolute control over its internet, which is something that's completely different from the understanding of what internet is, I guess, according to most of the people in this room. And again, they're trying to export it because obviously to many dictatorships, including Russia, including many African countries, including Central Asian countries, this is very promising. This is something that they really like, and they're trying to, and to some degree, successfully implementing it in their own countries. All of these things are put into extremists, are the most extreme, are the most effective in East Turkestan, in what China calls Sikyong. That's why we have been calling it Laboratory Lab of Digital Leninism. Of all these things that I have just mentioned, surveillance, the big data analysis, which is what the Integrated Joint Operations Platform is, a network, an institution system that has very strange name that probably doesn't really explain what it is, but basically it's a huge cloud database, a system that gathers data from almost every police officer, and there's plenty of police officers in Xinjiang, and gathers data from the internet, from users in Xinjiang, and then is trying to analyze it, trying to basically mark those people who are supposed to go to concentration camps or who are supposed to be somehow persecuted in any other way. And again, its final ambition, as the Chinese write themselves, is to prevent and predict crime, which is something very strange and really sounds like Minority Report, if anything. But this is CCP's ambition. And at the same time, you have large security market. A lot of Chinese companies and more Chinese companies are investing, are building innovation labs, are building all kinds of research centers in Xinjiang, developing all these technologies, including cameras, including basically safe city or smart city packages, developing these, testing these on the Uyghurs, and then again, exporting them even to Europe, as we have seen recently in Serbia. And there's an interesting concept, there's an interesting set of things that have become more, let's say, publicized in the last couple of years, and that's spying apps, applications that especially the law enforcement officers in China use in Xinjiang first, and then again this is being explored. I'll talk about it in a bit. But the first one is interesting because we have never seen anything like it outside of East Turkestan. That's Dingwang. Basically, in 2017, CCP came up with this app that every Uyghur was supposed to install on their smartphones, an app that basically spied on you and delivered any marked content to either police officers or checkpoints that in many cities in Xinjiang are actually every 500 meters. The other two are a bit different. They need police officers to actually either use it on your unlocked phone or basically this needs an operator to go through your phone, install it on your phone, and then with some cases after sifting through your content, making sure that there's nothing illegal, no illegal thinking, no wrongful thinking, as they like to say, it often deletes itself, so you don't even know that your phone has been actually gone through in a very systematic and effective way. This is, again, to sort of call on Chinese companies. This is Huawei in 2016, signing a strategic cooperation with the government of Xinjiang. There's plenty of these agreements, there's plenty of innovation labs that Huawei has established. So again, a lot of the tech, a lot of the products that people buy in the world have been developed and tested in Xinjiang on Uyghurs. The same goes for, at this point, almost any Chinese tech company, especially when it comes to surveillance. So all of them are incriminated in this. And I think it was actually a very good move from the US government to ban cooperation with these companies. And I would really love to see more countries to follow that suit, because it's really horrendous to think that cameras that you have in your offices, on your streets, have actually been developed in a very totalitarian system where people are suffering like they are. But, and this is sort of getting to the point of this presentation, in recent months, this conversation specifically is from this September, we have seen these technologies, these methods and systems exported to the rest of China. This is a conversation that obviously is now gone from Chinese internet, but Sean Zhang from the US has archived it. The whole conversation basically talks about how it is now becoming mandatory to install facial recognition systems in apartment buildings, that is private apartment buildings, not on the street, but basically in the entrances and in the elevators of public housing, not public, private and public housing both. The conversation is interesting because even though that the person who started is from Shanghai, you could see lots of commentators from basically all places in eastern China reporting the same thing. And why were they reporting it and complaining about it is because they were supposed to pay for it. That's what really, that's what struck home. That sort of shows you the human nature. So they were complaining because the government officials wanted them to either pay for installment of these systems or to pay with watching commercials in those elevators if those housings actually had elevators. But it also showed that it's mandatory for people in the districts and cities where this is being implemented to register with your local police bureau, to basically give them your face, give them your data. And it seems increasingly that also the spying apps that I have described are used in Xinjiang are now being used in the rest of China as well. There's reports of people, for example, going to register with a new address, whose phones were actually gone through with these apps. There's random checks reported, and in July there seemed to have been a major event where police officers would go through people's phones in Shanghai and Beijing, but the police denied anything like that, said this was just normal checkup, so it's hard to verify whether that really happened, but it seems to be so because the reports are many and from all kinds of cities in eastern China. So, when it comes to the concept that's actually in the name in the title of my presentation, it's a parallel on what Lenin said back in 1920, when basically it was communism is Soviet power plus electrification of the whole country. Electricity was supposed to be the tool to make work effective enough, to make everything effective enough so that the party could control and effectively govern the state, even though it was supposed to have total control over it. And as we say, socialism with Chinese characteristics is Leninism plus Xinjiangization of the whole country. And what I mean by that is a couple of things, because the tech aspect, I think I've already explained, but it also has what we call United Front work, or maybe you can call it human rights aspect. Basically, the tactics that we have seen employed in Xinjiang, the kind of control of religions and almost destroying of religions is now being exported to the rest of China as well. We expected it to happen in Ningxia because that's right next to Xinjiang actually. It's also a Muslim ethnic minority region, but we've also seen this happen in Henan, which is actually one of the core provinces of eastern China. So this is definitely spreading. and is becoming the new normal, basically. I mean, similar methods have already been also applied on Christians, and now on Buddhists and Taoists and all kinds of local religions. But obviously, because of terrorism being the buzzword, the most extreme cases we have, obviously, from Muslim groups, because it's easiest for China to legitimize their actions against them. This is Hong Kong. This is an interesting case of people with knowledge trying to resist what's on them. Because this is a smart lamppost, and what the protesters found inside was, according to them, a part of the CCP's Skynet system, which is basically a version of what's operating in Xinjiang and what's trying to predict and prevent crime. And interestingly enough, these lampposts are now in Belgrade, in Serbia, probably also of the same type and maybe with the same technology. We don't really know, because Serbian government made a discreet secret deal with China when it came to the safe city model there. I'll just quickly go through these because I don't have much time left. But in the end, this whole concept is to some degree being exported to the rest of the world with the digital Silk Road, where it's exporting the technology, where it's exporting the laws. Many African countries have adopted Chinese cybersecurity and cyber administration laws. And at the same time, with normalization of what's going on in Xinjiang being, again, the new norm, these efforts are the most visible at the UN, as has already been mentioned. We also have actually some research on how this works. And then through various kinds of lower profile events, such as cyber administration seminars, again, mainly for Belt and Road countries, and also, interestingly, Chinese scholars, and often also police academy. I mean, I'm talking about Chinese police academy, researchers who are active in what's going on in Xinjiang, going around European research institutes and giving talks and basically being the Chinese voice, and again, trying to normalize this. And the last thing before I leave, before I stop, I don't leave, but before I stop, the last aspect is something that Adrian Zenz, which is probably a name you've heard, a German scholar who's looking into what's going on in Xinjiang and Tibet, mainly through data analysis. He recently said that it is becoming increasingly impossible to do business in China without somehow supporting or participating in what's going on in Xinjiang, because so many businesses in eastern China are now working in Xinjiang, because that's where the labor force is cheaper, because it's slave labor, and also that's where the government incentives are. So many of these things, many of businesses now in China are basically complicit in what's going on in Xinjiang, and should definitely reconsider their positions. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Philip Giroche. I'm sorry to cut you slightly short because of the time constraint. I'm sure that we got burning questions from the floor because we had such a high quality presentation from our panels here. So we have 30 minutes to take questions and questions. So I would like to ask people in the hall to think it over, their questions, if you have burning questions. But I would like to ask a couple of questions to the panel so that it will give the floor some time to think. I would like to ask Hilary Miller, you know, in July there was a surveillance and human rights report by the special rapporteur, and there was a very useful recommendation which said that the states should impose an immediate moratorium on the export, sales, transfers, use of servicing of privately developed surveillance tools until a human rights compliance safeguard regime is in place, which is really noble. And do you think you have such things been looked at the UN? Is there anything, what is happening with this report? Maybe you could highlight, because it's part of this. It will bring quite a important issue.
Thank you so much for your question. I can't speak specifically with regards to the follow-up from this specific report and what you had just quoted. Speaking based on the knowledge that I know and the presentation that I delivered, it would be my guess and my take that given China as well as other bad actors that sit on the Human Rights Council, that follow-up and that stipulation is not being followed through, which again, as I iterated, is absurd and antithetical to the purpose of the United Nations Human Rights Council. These special procedures are put in place to ensure that measures like that are being implemented. However, I cannot speak particularly on the fact that that is being carried out.
Mm-hmm. And before I take a question from the floor, I would like to ask Mr. Gyaltsang, you have summarized the situation with human rights and the Western world's attitude very succinctly. And in this context, do you have some idea about how should the international community coordinate and take a multilateral approach to challenge and condemn the Chinese grave, abuse of human rights in Tibet and all this? How can the West has almost given up? Do you think, you said there were some instruments left, maybe you could highlight something where we could pursue this question?
First of all, I think, in recent past, there is a remarkable change of attitude, especially among the Western governments. I think there is growing realization of the danger and threat that China poses to the rest of the world. So I think one example of that is in March this year, the EU Commission came out with a new strategic paper on China, in which China was not only described as an economic competitor, but also a systematic rival. Offering an alternative way of government, contrasting to the established international liberal standard. So there is a rethinking of policies and attitude vis-a-vis China. So I think that, and for example, this conference is taking place in Geneva, which is part of Switzerland. I think within the Swiss Parliament, right now is a kind of process going on where members of parliament are demanding from the Swiss government to have a new strategy with regard to China. So I think this is a right moment for human rights organizations, Tibetans, and other people who are concerned about human rights to intensify the interaction with the Swiss government in order to make some meaningful recommendations. Then I think for example, just recently there was a statement by, I think, 29 or two Western countries concerning Xinjiang or the East Turkestan situation. So there are emerging signs of a rethinking. But I think we see what is needed is much more pressure from the public, civil society, NGOs, and from other organizations in order to press the government to undertake the necessary changes with regard to China. And I think in that context, media plays a very important role. And one of the, I have always been very concerned, for example, one of the ways for China to black out human rights situation in East Turkestan or in Tibet is to just, stop, to isolate Tibet and Xinjiang from the rest of the world, not to let anybody in, and not to to control the flow of information. So by that way, no media reports about the situation in Xinjiang or in Tibet. So therefore, in such circumstances, I think there need to be from the media or more initiative to really go there and, seek out any ways and means to get information from these places. One example, if you are not able to go to Tibet because of the restriction of China, why not go to India, where there are many refugees who have come recently from Tibet? Interview these people, interview Tibetans who have a personal experience of life under China. So there are many ways of doing things in a creative way.
Thank you. I'm going to take questions from the floor, but I would like to give the first question to the MP from Canada. As a procedure, maybe whoever raises the question, give your name and say, please.
Thank you to all the panelists. My name is Garner Jennis. I have a question for Mr. Giros. It sounded to me like this technology still requires human monitoring behind it. I'm curious for your thoughts on, as this model expands in China, the resources that are required, and if this is a sort of a burden that the Chinese state can sustain, this level of monitoring throughout the country.
Well, that's a very complicated question, but thank you for that. Yeah, it needs a lot of human resources. It needs tens, if not hundreds of thousands sensors to help because the algorithm, for example, can't really work with sarcasm, can't work with what is very effective with Chinese characters, of sort of switching different characters with the same sounding, with the same sound and like when you read it out loud, it makes sense to you, but the AI is still not as clever as to actually figure it out. Some of the more common phrases, I mean, it learns and is being given more and more directives. I mean, for example, the censorship guidelines that are using AI stuff on TikTok or Douyin are one of the most detailed. That's a very interesting case as well. And also needs lots of human resources on the ground, the actual enforcers of the law or whatever we want to call it. It's, again, the amounts that the CCP has to pay for it. And I mean, to some degree, it can be argued that the whole labor camp system in Xinjiang is actually paying for the surveillance system over there, because again, it was costly. There was some reports of, for example, the police officers or the soldiers there not getting their pay because the government there was not prepared to take the burden of such a massive surveillance state. So whether it's sustainable, I mean, Chinese internal security budget is way higher than the military spending on external defense. So it shows that this is definitely the direction they're going to. They're really trying as much as they can to control their population, because at the end of the day, it's the population that's their biggest threat. So that's where they're focusing most of their resources. And yeah, it's huge. And whether it's sustainable, I mean, that's hard to say, because it's non-transparent. We don't know the real spending. We don't know the actual burdens. We have anecdotal evidence. We have some data, but it would really need transparency and a huge amount of analysis. And again, CCP seems to be willing to sustain this. And as long as it's in power, which I think at this point it definitely is, Xi Jinping is at some points one of the most powerful, or if not the most powerful leader of the new China, or People's Republic of China. So they are going to put as much as they can, because at the end of the day, it's politics, it's remaining in power that they care about the most, and everything else is secondary. So yes, even if that means that most of the country will be, technically, I mean, the poverty might be even rising right now. I mean, you have more and more labor protests about the working conditions, about the pay being lower, a lot of people actually losing jobs over the trade war, and I don't think CCP cares about it as much in terms of actual welfare of the people. As long as that keeps them in power, they're going to do that, but it seems they don't care about GDP anymore. They don't care about economy as much. I mean, Hong Kong is one of the examples for me when you think about, okay, so if it's all about money, if it's all about economy getting more prosperous, why is Hong Kong happening? Which is a very important part of the CCP economy. So they don't seem to care about economy anymore as much as previous governments did, and it's all about control.
Thank you. Any question? So we got, I think, yourself, and then the second.
So, Axel Grafman's Tibet Initiative Germany. I have a question to Mr. Philip Chiros. I guess this whole IT technology in East Turkestan is interesting for Western companies and corporates as well. Do you have any information which company from Europe, from North America is involved in this cruel development of technology? Thank you.
Many. A lot of them are somehow involved. Technically, you could say that Volkswagen developing all these new beautiful testing grounds and new factories in Xinjiang is also being involved in that, because again, that's again doing high-tech stuff over in Xinjiang. But I think, and that's the problem, because either Western companies are not willing, or they are incapable of doing actual proper due diligence on actually looking who they are cooperating with and where is their technology and know-how being used at. But with forced transfers of technology, I would say most of companies that actually operate inside China through joint ventures and whatnot, they are involved in this, because in the end, what has CCP been doing, especially under Xi Jinping, is trying to promote this civil-military fusion of basically using any technology possible for dual purposes, that is for civilian and military. So things that are branded as civilian research can very easily, in the systems such as CCP's, end up being used by the military. And we have seen this on several occasions already, especially with the US research ending up in the hands of the military, or or in Australia, where you even had PLA officers pretending to be students studying at Australian defense universities. So,
we got a few hands being raised, so I want to ask a very short question and short answer from the panel, so that we'll try to get as many questions as possible. So, first gentleman back there.
It is not a question, it is a comment about the assessment concerning China. My name is Adrien Zoller, I am from Geneva for Human Rights. I do not believe that we can make an assessment of China's policy in looking at the vote of China. I would prefer to follow what has been said by Lobsang, the general attitude. It has not started several years ago. It has started in 1988 and 89 when the first resolution was adopted against China, Tiananmen. And then 91, the resolution on Tibet. The aim of the Chinese has been to suppress the subcommission. It has taken 15 years. The subcommission does no longer exist. And now it is to rewrite the standards. As the chairman, Sangay, has said to us at the beginning, at the opening session this morning. I think that we have to go in depth.
What is the question? Sorry, because we are running out of time. I would like to hear your question.
I said it was not a question but a comment, and that's enough. Thank you.
No, okay. Then I think this lady.
Yes, thank you. Melinda Ching-Simon. I'm at OHCHR. I wanted to thank all the speakers today, and I think my question is probably directed at Philip or Edward, and that is, would you be able to give some insights into initiatives by the government to put in new restrictive cybersecurity laws and the impact that that will have upon civic space and democratic values? Specifically, new cybersecurity laws in relation to, keeping records of, 6 months of records of logins, lack of anonymity, etc. Just wondering if either of you might be able to speak on that.
This question?
Or perhaps not.
Any answers?
I did not understand.
Any more? I think I would like to ask Edward Chin a question, couple of questions maybe. I hope we have still a few minutes. In your presentation, if I haven't misunderstood, you sort of allude to the fact that when they are using tear gas, you are not really sure about the substances used. Would that be some kind of a understanding that China is using chemical weapon in this case? That's question number one. Number two is, if you think that one country, two system is dead, then do you think the social credit system will come to Hong Kong very soon, or maybe you could answer something?
Well, maybe the second question first. The social credit system. Now, China will have this so-called social credit system all formalized, targeting 2020, if I'm correct. But, the way things are in the last 6 months has been unprecedented. You have seen, for instance, just less than 24 hours ago on Pettit Street, there is something going viral. There's a Citibank trader, that's his SFC license, being pushed over by 3 riot police, asking him, he is just one person trying to go to work, but he is stopped by 3 riot police, and for no reason. So, would he be like penalized because of the fact that he was just laundering around in Central? And then I just saw on the news that Citigroup is trying to investigate this. So, but the guy is doing nothing wrong. It's just trying to go to work, right? So if push comes to shove, everyone, it's like living under one nightmare, like a George Orwell 1984. The first question is on tear gas and also the blue color water cannon. Well, I think the UK stopped exporting these tear gas canisters back a few weeks ago, and then they are using things that's produced by mainland China. Almost every day, if there is a press conference by the police force, I think a lot of journalists from Hong Kong ask about what's the ingredient inside these tear gas. We don't know the long-term effect, how it's going to affect people, but think about those students from Chinese university that is being, we call it like TG, tear gas, more than close to 2,000 that is launched in 24 hours. There could be some long-term damage. So really, we should be condemning the Hong Kong/Chinese government by doing all these acts. And then it's not just one university, it's all universities.
Thank you, Edward. Thank you, Edward. It's taking the riots to another level, I think, if they're using gas, weapons of mass destruction. So we have another question from here.
Hello. Good afternoon, everyone. My question is to Hillary Miller. First of all, I would like to thank you very much for the wonderful job you're doing. As we have heard now about the violations of human rights and religious freedom and so on by China, what are the steps we must or should take as a common man or our government to make China abide by the rules and regulations of the United Nations or bring them to justice? What is the solution here, in your opinion? Because everybody knows that there is a problem, but is there a solution? Thank you.
I really appreciate your question, and it's very important to discuss. I can only speak from the NGO perspective, as I work for an NGO, excuse me. Thank you. Our solution is to call out human rights abusers like China, to expose when these bad actors are conducting themselves in a malign way and manipulating what should be a moral institution of the United Nations as well as other UN-sponsored bodies. Holding them to account from our perspective, like I've reiterated, means exposing the truth. How can we, in my specific work as the Morris B. Abram Fellow, issuing press releases, writing briefings, inviting speakers to the UN Human Rights Council that have direct experience with China's human rights abuses to bring it to the fore. I wish the solution was more concrete. It doesn't help our case that China works in concert with other bad actors as a voting member of the 47-nation human rights body. But what we can do in this room as an immediate solution is to stay informed, to stay updated, to not talk about these topics lightly and understand that it is a serious problem that one of the world's most egregious human rights abusers is on the top Human Rights Council body. So I apologize that I don't have a more concrete answer to that, but there are ways that in this room, when we leave today, that we can stay informed and follow up with this topic when the panel ends. Thank you.
Thank you. I have another question from that gentleman.
Okay, thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Chiman. I am from Hong Kong, and I have a question to Mr. Philip. What is the role of Western technological giants in contributing to the digital Leninism in China, and what are the ways or means that the international community can do to prevent those Western technological giants in contributing or strengthening China's digital Leninism? Thank you.
Thank you for the question. Well, it mainly again stems from the fact that, I don't know, like 2 years ago, China was not perceived as a problem. China was not perceived as a threat. For example, the concentration camp system only became a mainstream topic in late 2017, so that's 2 years ago, whereas the cooperation on development on AI and all these surveillance technologies, that's maybe even 20 years back. So all this cooperation was going on. For example, IBM is very complicit in developing AI that is now helping to drive all these things. It's many companies, it's even research institutes, as I already mentioned. MIT is now complaining about not being able to work with Huawei and Hikvision on all these wonderful technologies that are being used on basically racist repression of ethnic minorities. So it's many companies. There needs to be awareness about this. There needs to be calling out on these companies and make them do due diligence on who they are actually working with and where their products and research is ending up.
My question is to Edward. My question is to Edward. You said the protest in Hong Kong might last for 10 more years if necessary. Why do you say so? What is the strategy? What's the thinking behind it?
Now, if you talk about from Occupy Central, as the president, when we were fighting 5 years ago, we used the non-violent way to do it. I think that's still probably the most cost-efficient model. But when I talk more and more to the young people from Hong Kong, they are using, first of all, blockchain technology, try to stay away from they call popos, the policemen. But at the same time, when they also feel they are being deprived from the upward mobility that some of us experienced over the last 20, 30 years or so. So most of them, they see they will be replaced by mainland Chinese, and also at the very top level, the real estate developers, they will flee to the Five Eyes countries, plus EU countries. And the precincts will replace the so-called the Hong Kong tycoons. And then these youngsters, I think some of them, they will fight very hard. And unlike the Tiananmen from 30 years ago, they were brought in with technology, and then people who are like even middle-class people, we contribute to the movement with resources. Some people think that it is the Five Eyes countries that are sponsoring it, and I don't think so. So people that I talk to, including med school final year students, they would put their final will inside their backpack, and then they will be on the front line. I don't know, unless they kill a whole generation of young people. That means from the upper primary school to high school to university students. It's the CCP trying to sacrifice this whole generation of young people. That I don't know, but I know they are still very resistant, meaning the young people, including those who are middle class. They are still having this fighting spirit. That's why it has been lasting on for so long. And when I see, like an investment banker being arrested, I was just reading some social medias like that, more than 10,000 Hong Kong people in finance, they want to fight too. So that's just my 2 cents, President.
So, all good things must end. And I would like to finish this panel on time, I hope, by thanking the Department of Information and International Relations for organizing this seminar or Geneva Forum. And I would like to say thank you very much for all the panels here for contributing in such high level of discussion, and all the participants and the questions that have been raised. It has been very, very useful, and I hope you will have a good lunch now. So we break now for lunch.
So before we break for lunch...
Oh, sorry.
And the panelists for this insightful and informative panel session. So, as a token of memento and thank you, we would like to present a trend scarf kata and tanka to say thank you and appreciation for all your contribution. And may I request President Dr. Lobsang Singular to kindly present the kata and memento. We'll see. I have to give the news because he was here in the session and he has to go, but I'll give it So we have lunch break. We have lunch break from 1 to 2, and after lunch, as indicated in the program, all delegates are requested to be at Place de Nation, that's just in front of the UN office building, where we have a Tibet Museum exhibition, exhibiting photos on Tibet before Chinese invasion and the consequences of Chinese invasion, including the self-immolations and all. So 1 hour for lunch break, and then we will move from here, this conference room, to the museum exhibition site at exactly at 2. And it's going to have, since the exhibition is at outside, so please wear all your jackets. Thank you.
Oh yeah, if we could bring this. Hello. That's good. 같이 해. 대를. 좀더 대. 잠깐만. 왜? 그거라. We can show you the museum. Please come over. Please join. Yeah. So this also for good friends to learn. Yes. That's one. So we'll start from here. Some box to get
Yeah, so good afternoon everyone. So we have the Long Look Homeward as the theme. So this is one of the 10 traveling exhibition that we have. So this Long Look Homeward is the collective consciousness of Tibetan, the memory and the collaboration and the hope of Tibetan. So this entire exhibition is subdivided into 11 sections and broadly divided into the pre-1949 and post-1949, because 1949 is the establishment of the People's Republic of China. So if we talk about the pre-1949, we have the introduction of Tibet and the history of Tibet, and post-1949 we have the invasion and the resistance, and thereafter we have exile and the current situation in Tibet. So this exhibition is not only the photo exhibition, but also the experience of 11 Tibetans who have directly experienced the the atrocities of Chinese. So in the introduction, as we all know, Tibet is rightly known as the room of the world, and it has like 2.5 million square kilometer as an area, and the total population is 6 million, and from the east to west they are 2,500 the kilometer is the total kilometer from the east to west. And in terms of the because it has the lofty mountains, so it has various rivers right from the Brahmaputra, Indus and Sutlej, Irrawaddy and Mekong, Yellow, Yangtze. So it acts as a water tower for the Asia, especially the Southeast Asia, and it is directly means helping over 1 billion population, which is staying in the Southeast Asia. And the third important thing is the religion. If we talk about the Tibet, the Buddhism, which was brought from India in the 7th century. So from the 7th century onward, the Tibet has the Buddhism as the prime the religion. But along with that, we have the Burn religion, which is the ancestral religion, and also Muslim and Christianity, which are happily staying along with the other religion. So this is the Mount Kailash.
Mount Kailash is a sacred mountain for Jain, for Buddhists, for Hindus, and also for Burn religion. It's where Lord Shiva resides.
This is the Chakuri. In Tibet we have the Mensikang, which we have here.
Tibetan Medical Institute.
Tibetan Medical Institute.
Tibetan medicine. This is pre-invasion. So it's scientifically organized. So we have to go like this. If you go to Lhasa, Chinese has built a huge museum, both in Beijing and Lhasa. I'm sure they have one for Xinjiang.
So these are the latest attire from the Kham and the Lobsang. We have 3 provinces, Kham, Lobsang, and
3 provinces, 3 dresses.
So this is black spring.
Before the occupation.
So in terms of the pre-occupation, since we have the first king, Netisembo, which date back at 127 BC, Tibet has a written long history. It's about 2,000 years old history. And not only that, the Chinese and Tibetan has a very good relation from the 8th century onward, and both of the country never occupied each other. But there are a few times when the foreign invasion has occupied us. And from the 1642 we have the first Dalai Lama, and from there onward we have the reign of the Dalai Lama. And 1904, we have the Indian British Empire, which has occupied Tibet, and from there on is when the peace convention was signed with Tibet and the British Army. The Tibetan has independently signed it, so there is the sign that Tibet was independent and there is no foreign.
1914, they signed a treaty with British India, and the border between Tibet and India was demarcated. So even today the border is called McMahon Line because British was represented by Sir McMahon and we were represented by Tibetan Prime Minister. So India says McMahon Line is a border, but the head and who signed it? We signed it. So it's called Simla Convention. There's a Pakistan Simla Convention, but this is the Simla Convention of Tibet.
So this is the palace of first king back in 127 BC.
You can clearly see we were influenced by British, Army uniform is very much British like. So they were the secretaries, the finance minister, and then prime ministers later, and the ministers of Tibet in 1914. Yeah.
I always want to ask one thing. The hat, because they don't use it anymore.
We don't use it anymore. Till 1980s, in our cabinet meetings, we meet every Tuesdays and Fridays. They used to wear that hat. So I think it ended. So you can say it's the British Army.
So now we are entering the second part, that is the post-1949.
Oh, Edward, your 17th point agreement.
Yeah.
Oh, yes.
I think
so the one country, two system. Yeah. This is the original one country, two system. We signed this agreement.
Deng Xiaoping was part of it.
No.
Deng Xiaoping was the political advisor of the Western division of the Chinese army. He was in charge of Sichuan. Okay. That actually division invaded and occupied Tibet. Later, they were pushed out by the Xinjiang military division. The intelligence bureau came. They were all removed. And Chiang Ching-kuo, who was primarily responsible for occupying Tibet, occupying Tibet, he was removed and tried during Cultural Revolution by the Xinjiang division. So again, Xinjiang, Tibet was originally occupied by the Sichuan division, but later controlled by the Xinjiang division. There's a Chinese army marching into Tibet. See, they came like this, flags.
The red Communist Party.
So now they say peacefully occupied, and Tibetans happily welcome them. So you don't see much happiness here.
Was the 7 years in Tibet and London a good depiction of what's the real happening?
Yeah. 7 years in Tibet. Henry Hara.
So
assistance. Sorry. This is the soon.
Since the invasion happened, it's not that Tibetan has kept their hand closed. So we resist from time to time, and it was first started in the Lhoka region, where we formed the Volunteer Freedom Fighter (VFF), popularly known as the Chushi Khanto. And then they are in Lhasa in March, the 10th March 1959. There was a large revolt against the Chinese conspiracy, and close to around 1,000 people were killed during that time. And also, if you talk about the length of the fight that we had with the Chinese, we claim about 103 different fights that we fought with the Chinese. And the last fight was from the Mustang, the Nepal, the Tibet border Mustang. So that happened in 1970 when we fought with the Chinese.
Later, Chinese brought the
Korean battle-hardened PLA army to Tibet. They brought 100,000, and then we got crushed. Initially, we were resisting.
So he's the captain of...
Commander. This is the self-defense element. Edward Chin, I say you have to self-defense. Self-defense part. So actually, many of them were monks. Because first thing the Chinese did was bombard and destroy monasteries. Monks were left without, so they joined the resistance.
How big is the force, like the military?
Our military less than 10,000.
Less than 10,000.
Later the Chinese brought, it's estimated they brought 100,000 Korean battle, hardened army. Then they crushed. Then he saw escape. He from midnight of March 17th till March 31st. For 14 days he disappeared. But only person who knew exactly his location was President Eisenhower of US. Because CIA had trained some people how to send telegraphs. And then they were with His Holiness. So each morning they sent telegraph, and Eisenhower has this pin on the map between Tibet and India, and he puts, Eisenhower is a general, he's an army guy. He was very interested, where is Dalai Lama? So he puts a pin. And 3 or 4 days prior to coming to India, he calls Nehru and says, give refuge. Because His Holiness Tibetan, we didn't know whether India will accept us or Bhutan will accept us. There were 2 delegations going to Bhutan and India. So Eisenhower was well informed. CIA, even then, can you imagine? There's a few people who can do telegraphs. Yes? He's the museum guy. He's the deputy director of museum.
So the level of destruction, of course, close to around 6,000 monasteries were being destroyed, and 99% of monks and nuns were disrobed during that time. And because of that, close to around 1.2 million people are directly, the guilt or the consequences of the occupation of the Tibet by the Chinese. So
can you imagine? See, this used to have the Gandhin. They used to have 3,000 or 4,000 monks. Ruins. This photograph was in 1985. This is you saw the photograph of the first palace of the king. All looted, all destroyed. Now this is the going on. So first they said they remove all the nomads, saying there's a desertification, there's not enough grass, so nomads should move. It's estimated that anywhere from 1 to 2 million nomads from Tibetan nomadic area would remove and put in ghetto-like places. And after a few years, the Chinese company would come and started digging minerals. Can you imagine our religious artifacts? It's like piled up like stones, with utter disrespect. And you won't notice actually some of the big statues has everything here, but on the heart side there's a hole, because we kept all the precious stones in the heart, So they'll cut the head, roof, and then take out all the precious stones from the heart. Slogging.
Yes, this is really enemy of the country of China. China really enemy of the country and everything. Same as Turkestan.
Here's the photograph of Pinchen Lama.
So human rights violation, as we all know, it is common in China, because the arbitrary detention of any of the the protester. So we have recently witnessed the Hong Kongers who have revolted against the Chinese human rights violation on the pretext of the extradition bill that they have raised. So as Sikyong has many times said, if you want to know the Chinese history, you should know the Tibetan history, because what China is doing right now is we have experiences 60 years ago. So that is what we have to look into the history of Tibet very closely if we want to know the Chinese future. And you can see the youngest prisoner on the earth, like the Gedinchu Nyima, who was imprisoned at the age of 6, and till date we don't know whether he's alive or where he is.
Yeah, often this question is asked: what happens if His Holiness Dalai Lama stays in Tibet? You can clearly see what happens to him. Panchen Lama stayed back, and then he was tried publicly during the Cultural Revolution, publicly humiliated, slapped, everything, and then he died mysteriously. And in Tibet. Yeah. This is the struggle session. Every week they are paraded, and the public come out and humiliate you, insult you, slap you, spit on you, and he stayed back. Now, if both had stayed back, then our fate would have been like the leaders of, Uyghur leaders. They all called to Beijing for a meeting. And then the whole plane load of Uyghur leaders were with the plane, and it just exploded in the sky. Uyghurs were left without any leaders, mainly because they just blew up. Yeah? Yeah. And they were actually agreeing with Beijing.
So the Sinicization in 65, Tibet was blown down to Tibetan Autonomous Region, and 66 the Cultural Revolution was happening, and in the 80s the socialist orientation. So in different names, fundamentally what they are trying to do is uprooted the deep culture of Tibet and change the Tibetan into the Chinese culture. So there are like influx of Chinese people into the Tibet, where in many cities of Tibet, Tibetans are becoming minorities. And right from the kindergarten, the Tibetan language were not being taught. So the basic, the elementary language, they converted into Tibetan into the Chinese. So the fundamental thing is they want to uproot the deep-rooted culture of Tibet.
Very similar to our good friends.
So you can see the schools.
Systematic. Now then His Holiness finally comes towards India. His younger brother. He finally arrives in Arunachal, Menpa area. Then the people followed him. Then then we established ourselves, our schools, our hospitals, our settlements, everything, established, and they're quite successful. Now this is the escapists, those who flee Tibet. They have to cross the base camp of Mount Everest. Look at it, they're just wearing sneakers. So many lose their fingers and frostbites. They come, you can clearly see. And this was shot by a Romanian TV crew. They were crossing the mountain, and the PLA camp just shot them. Base camp of Mount Everest. Yes. Famous Chapchi prison. Now you can clearly see Chinese letters are much bigger than Tibetan letters. Step by step they synthesize you, Look how advanced.
How many candid cameras are there in Tibet right now? The Potala Palace.
Oh, as I said, there are more cameras than windows. Yeah, it's surveillance.
Yeah.
I forgot to describe the grid system, but maybe tomorrow afternoon. So many. Chokang Then this is self-immolation, burning to death. It says, invite His Holiness Dalai Lama to Tibet. Inside Tibet, huh? Yeah. You can see these, they are carrying Tibetan flags. He's burning, but he's carrying Tibetan flags. So in the temple, there was a picture of Panchen Lama. This is the picture of Dalai Lama. It's just killed.
You can clearly see the wages difference between the Tibetan and the Chinese.
In Lhasa. In Lhasa. This is 1980 something. They give you 30 renminbi if you're Tibetan. You give 50 renminbi if you're Chinese. This 1990, it's our capital city. It is they give you $30 if you're Tibetan. They give $50 if you're Canadian. Same worker. It's This is the signboard. Yeah. I mean, this is like blatant. Yeah.
Examples.
Examples. Yes. So we come to exile now. Solon is here. First we started road builders. We built many of the highways in India. The first parliament. That's the whole kind of the design. Now we go back.
Yeah. Now the rain has stopped also. So the good.
What is in a Swiss? 우리 초밥 이내에 순별 초밥이 있냐야 이래. 무슨 이래?
할래
그래도 봐. 얘는 산에 꼬라게 뛰어요. 모르다 제.
그걸 건드려.
We are saying this. We brought it from India. So the Swiss, Swiss Tibet Association or Swiss Tibet Association should keep it. When I say keep it, I say with the tent. So the tent belongs to them.
You have a museum here, Tibet museum?
Yes, this is their museum.
Should be keep all the time.
All the time.
Next time we set up one is here, is Turkestan Museum.
Yeah. See, now you know. And then the Hong Kong will also.
Yeah.
Yes.